In 1993, the NFL introduced full-fledged free agency, and 1 year later they introduced the salary cap, ushering in a whole new era. Parity was more prevalent during this era, with fewer teams hitting all-time highs or all-time lows, but that wasn't completely eliminated, in particular, the lows. Today, we will be taking a look at each NFL franchise's worst season during this time from 1993 onward. As usual, we will be using C-Score, this channel's metric for measuring the quality of every single NFL team during the Super Bowl era. A deeper explanation of C-Score from what's listed here can be found in the description below. Thank you for joining us today. We're ready to start tackling each of the NFL's 32 franchises one by one in alphabetical order. And we will begin with the Arizona Cardinals, as they've been known since the 1994 season. Their worst year came in the year 2000. They went 3-13, were bottom 3 in both points scored and points allowed, not against a particularly difficult schedule. That brought their C-score to a negative 37.438. The Cardinals spent most of the season getting beaten and battered. Head coach Vince Tobin was fired after a 2-5 start, and under interim coach Dave McGinnis, things got even worse as they went 1-8 under his tenure. A 7-game losing streak to end the season rooted the Cardinals to the bottom of the NFC East and landed them the second overall pick in the 2001 NFL Draft. We found that the Atlanta Falcons' worst season took place in 2007. They scrounged out 4 victories against 12 losses, and they were bottom 4 in points scored and points allowed, and bottom 10 in strength of schedule. Their C-score was negative 26.112. This 2007 season had a black cloud hanging over it from the start due to the heinous actions of Michael Vick. Then their first-year head coach Bobby Petrino abandoned the team in cowardly fashion with 3 games remaining and Atlanta sitting at 3-10. They did win a game under interim head coach Emmett Thomas, but still finished last in the NFC South and received the 3rd overall pick in the 2008 draft. The Baltimore Ravens joined the NFL during this era in 1996, and their worst season was also in 2007. They went 5-11. They were 24th in points scored. Their defense was a little better at 22nd points allowed, but that did keep them out of the bottom 10. They had the 19th hardest schedule in the league, tied for that, and their C-score was minus 17.205. Unable to replicate their highly successful 2006 season, the Ravens instead spiraled downward. After a 4-2 start, they lost 9 straight games, 5 of them by multiple possessions, before pulling out the last game of the season. The Ravens finished last in the AFC South. Head coach Brian Billick, a Super Bowl winning coach, was fired after the season, and the Ravens found themselves with the 8th overall pick in the 2008 draft. They're pretty good now, but Buffalo spent the majority of this era not being very good, and 2001 was the low point. They check in at 3-13, 27th in scoring, 29th in points allowed. They did have a reasonably difficult schedule, 13th hardest in the league. Their C-score for all of this was negative 25.168. The Bills joined in with the rest of their division in taking a collective dump just in time to allow the Patriots open-ended free reign. Rookie head coach Greg Williams was given leeway and brought back in 2002, lasting only through 2003. The Bills finished last in the 5-team AFC East and picked 4th in the 2002 NFL Draft, pushed down a spot by the expansion Houston Texans. The Carolina Panthers were also new to the NFL during this era, joining as an expansion team in 1995. They avoided most of the typical growing pains of an expansion franchise, but in 2010 it couldn't be avoided. They went a dreadful 2-14, finishing dead last in the league in scoring, the defense 26th best, middle of the road schedule at 17th, a C-score of negative 33.156. Finishing last in scoring is one thing, but the Panthers never once hit the 24-point mark all season. They gave up that many or more 9 times. Head coach John Fox, once having led the Panthers to the Super Bowl, was out after the season. Carolina finished dead last in the league and landed the first overall pick in the 2011 NFL Draft. The monsters of the Midway were not monsters during the 1997 season. They went 4-12, but they were bottom 3 in both points scored and points allowed. They did, though, play a difficult schedule, coming in second hardest in the league. That made their C-score a little better, still bad, negative 22.286. Underlying that strength of schedule was the Bears division, the NFC Central, where the other 4 teams all had a winning record. They went 3-5 outside the division, though, but it wasn't enough. Head coach Dave Wannstedt survived one more season, and the Bears were slotted into the 5th pick for the 1998 draft. We've got ourselves another team that's very good now, but spent most of this time not so good. And in 1999, they took the cake, so to speak. They only managed a 4-12 record. The offense wasn't bottom of the league bad at 24th, but the defense was bottom of the league bad. And their strength of schedule hovered around the bottom third of the league, 20th out of 31. All this brought them to a negative 28.404 C-score. The Bengals turned down a huge draft haul from the New Orleans Saints, instead choosing to run out this team. Head coach Bruce Coslett survived this season, but was gone 3 games into the next one. Despite a miraculous 3-game winning streak late in the season, the Bengals were 5th out of 6 in the AFC Central and chose 4th in the 2000 draft. Our next entry is sure to cause some controversy as we're looking at the Cleveland Browns and the 2000 season. They were an expansion team just the year before, and later on down the line they had a winless record. Yet this is the bunch that checks in with the lowest C-score. They went 3-13, they were dead last in points scored, bottom 5 in points allowed. They did have a tough schedule, tied for 6th hardest in the league. Their C-score, negative 36.678. The Browns were 2-1 to start the season before a 7-game losing streak and another 5-game losing streak. All told, they were shut out 4 times and scored in the single digits 8 times, half of the season. Despite still being in their franchise infancy, head coach Chris Palmer got the boot after the season. Cleveland finished last, and they earned the 3rd pick in the 2001 draft. The Dallas Cowboys won the Super Bowl after both the 93 and 95 season, but since 95 haven't even been back to the NFC title game, and their low point was in 2002. They went 5-11. The defense was in the top half of the league, 13th in points allowed, but the offense was 2nd worst, and the strength of schedule was 3rd easiest. That brought them to a negative 21.204 C-score. Dallas alternated losses with wins for the first 6 games of the season before stumbling to a 2-8 record the rest of the way. The glory days solidly behind them. Head coach Dave Campo was fired after the season for Bill Parcells. Dallas was last in the NFC East for the 2nd straight season and landed the 5th pick in the 2003 NFL Draft. The Denver Broncos can claim 3 Super Bowl championships from 1993 onward, but 2010 was not one of those seasons. They went 4-12. They could score a little bit. They were 19th in the league overall, but the defense gave up points like crazy. They were last in the league in that category. Strength of schedule around the bottom 3rd at 22, and that 22 is reflected in their C-score, negative 22.005. The Broncos famously got off to a 6-0 start in 2009, but the pseudo Josh McDaniels magic had well worn off. From that point, Denver was 5-17 until McDaniels' firing with 4 games left in the 2010 season. Interim coach Eric Studville managed 1 victory, but couldn't keep the Broncos out of last place in the AFC West or out of the 2nd overall pick in the 2011 draft. This will probably be another controversial pick. We're not taking the Detroit Lions from 2008. Rather, we're taking them from 2009. They went winless in 08, but they were somehow worse in 09 despite notching 2 victories. They were 27th in points scored, slightly respectable, but dead last in points allowed, middle of the road schedule. The C scores were close, but the 09 version comes out a little lower, negative 35.545. Detroit got off the mat in Week 3 to get their first win since the 2007 season, but the rest of the season remained putrid. One more win by exactly 1 point still leaves this team in the absolute doldrums. Head coach Jim Schwartz was in his first season and got to stick around for a while as the team got better. But this team was last in the NFC South and picked second in the 2010 NFL Draft. A perennially good team throughout this entire era, 2005 proved an exception for the Green Bay Packers. They went 4-12, but they were better than that record would indicate. Still, they weren't great though, 22nd in scoring, 19th in points allowed, tied for the 20th hardest schedule in the league. C-score went a little easier on them, they were negative 11.151. The Packers got out of the gate slowly at 0-4 and never could get back on track. Green Bay never won back-to-back games and finished last in the NFC South, their first last-place finish in 17 years in the old NFC Central days, a testament to their overall consistency. Mike Sherman's contract extension couldn't save his job, and the Pack slid into the 5th pick of the 2006 draft. The last team to join the NFL did so 9 years into this era, the Houston Texans. 2005 serves as their worst season though. A 2-14 record is one thing, 26th in the league in scoring, dead last in points allowed. They're able to hang their hat a little bit on a top 10 strength of schedule, tied for 9th hardest. Their C-score is negative 26.812. Houston showed signs of life in their 3rd ever season, but that didn't last into this, their 4th season. Their 2 wins both followed separate 6-game losing streaks, and the Texans plummeted back to the bottom of the league. Dom Capers got the pink slip after the season, and Houston was at the top of the 2006 NFL Draft. This will be the only franchise whose worst season since 1993 was 1993 as we check in with the Indianapolis Colts. They went 4-12, which was an improvement from what they had done a couple years earlier, and they were second from the bottom in both points scored and points allowed. They did have the 9th hardest strength of schedule. Their C-score just missed going negative 30 at negative 29.995. The Colts' voodoo 9-7 record the season before wasn't enough to help this team, which started 2-1 before dropping back to the dregs of the league. 3 of their 4 wins were decided by the exact same score, 9-6. Ted Marchibroda retained enough goodwill at head coach to last another couple of seasons, but this team finished last in the AFC East and earned the 2nd overall pick in the 1994 draft. The Jacksonville Jaguars entered the NFL alongside the Carolina Panthers in 1995, and they made 2 AFC Championship games in their first 5 seasons. But the Jags had a lot of bad football too, and this was the worst of the group in 2012. They went a dreadful 2-14, 3rd from the bottom in points scored, 4th from the bottom in points allowed, tied at 21st for strength of schedule, and their C-score dipped under 30, negative 31.871. The Jags won their 2 games by exactly 5 points each, and 9 of their 14 losses were by multiple possessions. Shad Khan's first year as owner, not so coincidentally lined up with Mike Mularkey's last and only year as head coach. Jacksonville was rooted to the bottom of the AFC South, and only secured the 2nd overall pick in the 2013 NFL Draft. Why not the 1st? Because this team in the same season was even worse than they were, the 2012 Kansas City Chiefs. Also 2-14. Their defense was bad but not dreadful like their offense, which was last in the league in scoring. Strength of schedule hovering around the middle of the pack at 18th. Their C-score dips all the way down to minus 34.294. It's tough nowadays to think of the Chiefs as doormats, but that's exactly what they were during this time, and this season was the nadir. This was the end of the Romeo Crennel coaching era, but after his firing following the season, the Andy Reid era began, which of course is still ongoing. As mentioned, KC safely secured the top overall spot in the 2013 draft. Currently known as the Las Vegas Raiders, in the 2006 season they were still the Oakland Raiders, and they were bad. They went 2-14, despite their defense being okay, 18th in points allowed, but dead last in scoring points against the 13th hardest schedule in the league. That offense almost single-handedly turned the C-score from just below average to terrible at minus 26.718. It's kinda nuts for a 2-14 team to have a 2-game winning streak, but the Raiders did just that. Of course, it was sandwiched between a 5 and a 9-game losing streak. Oakland pulled the plug on the Art Shell return as head coach. They finished dead last, and they picked first in the 2007 draft, which they royally screwed up, while 4 Hall of Famers among 17 Pro Bowlers went in just the first round alone. Currently known as the Los Angeles Chargers, in 2000 the San Diego Chargers pulled off this ridiculous 1-15 season. They weren't bottom of the league in scoring or allowing points though, 26th and 29th respectively, and they did have the second hardest strength of schedule in the league, which makes them one of the better 1-15 teams in NFL history, with their C-score only dropping as low as negative 23.56. Now, 1-15 is clearly a crap record, but the Chargers did lose 8 games by 1 possession, somewhat mitigating the disaster as a whole. The Chargers always played hard, and head coach Mike Riley was retained for another year. But 1-15 is still 1-15. San Diego was bottom of the NFL and secured the number 1 pick in the 2001 draft, which they traded to help jumpstart their rebuild. We now have our third different team from a different location. Today, the Los Angeles Rams. In 2009, the St. Louis Rams. This team has gotten plenty of coverage on this channel because they were so terrible. 1-15, bottom of the league in scoring, somehow only second from the bottom in points allowed, bottom 10 strength of schedule, and abysmal minus 42.938 C-score. Not much more to say about this abomination that we haven't already in other videos. It should be noted that this season brought the Rams the number 1 pick in the 2010 draft, which, like the Raiders before them, they completely whiffed on. Also like the Raiders, 17 Pro Bowlers in just the first round sat behind that pick, including the next 6 in a row. No wonder they were in the midst of such a terrible run of play. The Miami Dolphins put up a 1-15 record in 2007, yet this team from 2019, despite having 5 wins, was worse. They were 25th in scoring, but dead last in points allowed. Reasonably difficult schedule, tied for 11th in the league. The C-scores were once again close, but this team checks in at minus 26.798. What hurt this team dramatically was a historically terrible start to the season. They scored 26 points in their first 4 games total, and they allowed more than that in each game for a total of 163 points allowed. They were being outscored 41-7 on average. Despite the later rebound, Miami was last in the East. They did retain Brian Flores as head coach, and they only landed the 5th overall pick in the 2020 draft. They don't win Super Bowls, but they're not historically bad most of the time either. The 2011 season saw the Vikings finish 3-13, yes, a very bad record, but some underlying metrics make this look like a slightly better picture. 19th in scoring, second from the bottom in points allowed, 4th hardest schedule in the league. The C-score's not great, but considering the context, negative 16.058 is acceptable. Minnesota opened the season with 4 straight losses, each by 1 possession, only being outscored by 19 total points. They just couldn't recover from that. Leslie Frazier's transition from interim head coach to the head coach was given more time. Despite the last place finish in the NFC North, leading to the 3rd overall pick in the 2012 NFL Draft, which they used to fleece the Cleveland Browns. The New England Patriots had truly terrible teams before 1993. Since then, they've had a Hall of Fame head coach for every season. But their worst season is the one they just completed, 2023. They went 4-13, the offense let them down, second from the bottom in points scored, while the defense, despite dealing with many injuries, still finished in the middle of the pack, as did their strength of schedule. Their C-score was negative 20.791. It shall come to pass that all empires will one day fall. So it was for these Patriots. They took some really bad losses, spelling the end of the most successful coaching stint in American professional sports history. The last place Patriots locked up the 3rd pick in the 2024 draft, and they will now move forward without Bill Belichick. The New Orleans Saints had a rough go of it during the end of the 1990s, and the true end of 1999 was the worst of the bunch. They went 3-13, bottom 4 in both points scored and points allowed, and at 22nd out of 31, they were also bottom 10 in strength of schedule. That C-score fell below the dreaded 30 mark, minus 30.394. We talked earlier about the draft haul the Bengals passed up from New Orleans. Well, the Saints gave that haul elsewhere, but they joined Cincy in their misery from 1999 as well. Looking well spent, Mike Ditka was fired at the end of the season, and with the Saints at the bottom of the NFC West, they secured the 2nd pick in the 2000 draft, which of course they had already traded away. Coming off a playoff appearance in 2002, the Giants fell pretty hard to have their worst season of this era in 2003. They went 4-12, and like so many other teams that we've covered, they were bottom 4 in both points for and points allowed. Their strength of schedule was better than some of the other teams we've covered though, tied for 11th. The C-score, not terrible, not great by any means, negative 22.476. The Giants are another team we look at here that started off well enough, going 2-1 before standing at 4-4. They then lost 8 straight to end the season. That brought an end to Jim Fossil's coaching tenure 3 years after the Giants were in the Super Bowl and saw the return of the prodigal son in Tom Coughlin. The Giants did finish last in the NFC East and picked 4th in the 2004 NFL Draft. The other team from New York that's not really from New York is the 1995 New York Jets. Despite only one victory the following season, this team at 3-13 was worse. Bottom of the barrel at scoring, 30th out of 30, 5th from the bottom in points allowed, all that with the 3rd easiest schedule in the league. They did manage to avoid going to negative 30 in C-score, checking in at negative 28.331. After 1994, the Jets fired Pete Carroll as head coach for Rich Kotite because they wanted to, quote, win now. But they opened the season with a 38-point loss. It didn't get much better going forward. Kotite did stick around for one more season to end his Jets tenure at 4-28. And the last in the AFC East Jets beat out 2 expansion teams to the number 1 pick in the 1996 NFL Draft. It was dark days for the Philadelphia Eagles in 1998. They ended the season 3-13. They avoided the bottom 10 in points allowed, but they didn't do so in points scored, in fact finishing at the very bottom of the league. Their strength of schedule was tied for 20th hardest. This was a bad team. Their C-score was negative 32.276. The Eagles' downturn throughout most of the 1990s finally hit rock bottom this season, with 3 wins by 9 total points. Former Coach of the Year Ray Rhodes was fired, and for the second time, we're seeing the birth of an Andy Reid era, although this happened first chronologically. The Eagles were dead last in the league, but only got the 2nd pick in the 1999 NFL Draft because the expansion Browns were given the 1st pick. The Eagles' cross-state rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers, also had their worst season in 1998. But check this out, they were 7-9. They were 7th in the league in points allowed. The offense let them down at 28th. C-score negative 9, .380, which can only really be described as mediocre. And if mediocre is the worst output you put out over 31 seasons, that's pretty damn good. The Steelers are without question a top-notch organization. This team was actually 7-4 and very much in playoff contention when they lost a highly controversial coin toss on Thanksgiving, leading to a loss and beginning a 5-game losing streak to end the season. Head coach Bill Cowher's job was nowhere near any jeopardy. The Steelers finished third in the 5-team AFC Central, and they only dropped down to the 13th overall pick in the 1999 draft. Now, this team was properly bad. The 2004 San Francisco 49ers. 2-14 on the season. Third from the bottom in points scored, dead last in points allowed, against a mediocre schedule, 20th hardest in the league. Their C-score, negative 33.838. This team had a chance to go winless. They never once led a game this entire season at the end of regulation. Their 2 wins both came in overtime against the not-that-great Arizona Cardinals. Head coach Dennis Erickson was quickly shown the door after just 2 seasons, and the 49ers dropped to dead last in the NFL, securing the number 1 overall pick in the 2005 draft. The Seattle Seahawks have been more competitive than not during this era, even in the early part of it, but 2009 represented their worst season. They went 5-11 and were steady in points scored and points allowed at 25th, not at the very bottom of the league, but they were brought down by their strength of schedule, which was bottom 5 as far as being easy. Their C-score, minus 22.441. Now, despite only 5 wins all season, Seattle's first 2 wins of the season were 28-0 and 41-0 shutouts. A 4-game losing streak to end the season ended Jim Morris' tenure as head coach, beginning the Pete Carroll era, which just only ended. Seattle finished third in the NFC West, 4 games ahead of the horrific Rams, and secured the 6th pick in the 2010 draft. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers of this era weren't nearly as bad as their beginnings and for most of the 80s, but 2011 did represent a low point. At 4-12, they were 6th from the bottom in points scored, dead last in points allowed. What did save them from having a truly terrible C-score was that second hardest strength of schedule, and they check in at minus 25.988. Long losing streaks to end the season have become a common thread in this list. Tampa was no different, going from 4-2 to 4-12 thanks to a 10-game losing streak. Head coach Raheem Morris was unable to withstand that end to the season, and he was gone after the season. The Bucs were last in the NFC South, but only secured the 7th pick in the 2012 draft. Entering this era as the Houston Oilers and continuing on as the Tennessee Oilers, in 1999 this franchise took on the name we know today, the Tennessee Titans. 15 years later, in 2014, they were dreadful. They went 2-14, third from last in scoring, 29th in points allowed. They probably would have gone under negative 30 in C-score but for their middle-of-the-road schedule. That C-score wound up being minus 29.618. Hey look, another 10-game losing streak to end the season. The Titans opened 1-0 and got to 2-4 before it all fell to pieces. Head coach Ken Wisenhunt actually survived the season, but he didn't survive a 1-6 start to the next season. From the bottom of the NFC South, Tennessee lost out on the first overall pick in the 2015 draft due to a tiebreaker, having to settle for pick number 2. We've made it to our final team, and we have our second team, whose worst season in this era was the last season, the 2023 Washington Commanders. They finished 4-13, they were 25th in points scored, slightly respectable. Not so respectable were the points allowed, dead last in the league, right in the middle of the pack, 16th hardest strength of schedule. Their C-score was minus 27.124. It took only 2 seasons to be known as the Commanders for this team to top, or bottom, any other season they had as the Redskins, and believe it, there was lots of competition. 2-0 very quickly became 4-13. The Commies finished last in the NFC East, head coach Ron Rivera was shown the door, and they secured the second overall pick in the 2024 draft. We'll take a quick look here at the 5 best and 5 worst teams during this era. It's no surprise that the '98 Steelers notched the highest C-score among this group of 32, but it might be surprising that the 2023 Patriots climbed as high as 5th best. The Rams of 2009 are the 3rd worst team in the entire Super Bowl era, so this was always a race for second, a race won by the 2000 Cardinals. 4 teams from the best 5 have won multiple Super Bowls in this era, but so too have 2 teams from the worst 5. Thank you so much for taking the time to click on this video and watching it all the way through. Hopefully by including all 32 NFL teams, we can all share our misery together. Please be sure to give the video a like, maybe share it around some, and if you haven't yet done so, subscribe to the channel and ding the bell icon for future notifications on all videos. I imagine many will take umbrage with the Browns, Lions, and Dolphins entries. I implore you to not just look at records. We can probably accept that a player with 12 sacks didn't automatically have a better season than another player with 11 sacks. There's so much more at play, as is the case here. But feel free to sound off on those teams or any others in the comments. Any other thoughts you may have or any other ideas for future videos are always welcome. Thank you again for joining us, and until next time, I hope you have an awesome day.